What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with Steve.
Hello.
And today's episode is obviously going to be about the big news in the National Hockey League, the Jack Eichel trade. That is of no surprise. We're going to be delving into that. And if we do have time at the end, we'll talk about what we wanted to get to last week, which is like the on-ice Chicago Blackhawks, what's going on with the team on there. But before we get into any of that, I know with Steve, you kind of had some words and some final thoughts on the Blackhawks situation, and you kind of wanted to just wrap up everything in a neat little, I guess, as neat of a bow as you possibly can, given a situation like this. So,
Yeah, I just feel like I feel like we owe it, like, because we had a whole episode that we kind of should just, like, I guess, because the league finally is putting wrap on it, putting a bow on it if they can. I guess we probably should too. So I guess the follow up really is just that Coach Quenneville, after we talked about it on that later that night, ended up resigning. Kevin Cheveldayoff's job ended up being safe because, from what Bettman said, he attended the meeting had no prior knowledge, attended the meeting was under the impression that his superiors would handle it, and that was the extent of his involvement. So, I guess because he was the AGM, they really don't expect him to follow up with something that goes up the chain like that. So, he's safe. Stan Bowman was already gone. I think there's there's a civil suit now involved with Kyle Beach. I think he's suing the NHL or the team. Bro, this whole thing is such a mess. I just know that the league put their statement out finally, saying that they were satisfied with the conversation they had with Kevin Cheveldayoff, and that they were, of course, outraged at the handling by the organization, but still only slapped him with a $2 million fine, which is, nothing, but whatever. So I guess it's like the real like ramifications in terms of everything that happened, like with personnel changes. And then Jonathan Taves came out and like tried to clarify what he said. I guess it was kind of an apology for what he said earlier. We had talked about his comments already, and I don't know about you, but I really felt like the apology he issued was really hollow. I really felt it sounded more like he was apologizing that we as like a community got offended about what he was saying, rather than like what justly should have been an apology for defending people who happen to be defending an abuser and a serial abuser, somebody who went to prison for this. Um, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on like what Taves comments, but I thought they were kind of dumb and still dumb, and he looks even dumber now.
yeah, it's worth noting some things.
Yeah, probably didn't get all the details. Sorry.
Well, no, I'm just like in general. It's worth noting that Quenville was not fired; he resigned. So, whether or not that's one of those situations where the team was like, "Hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, just resign so it doesn't look bad," or he came to that conclusion of his own volition, we'll never know. Given who he has been through his career, I would like to think that this is a decision that he's made, but we will never know.
Yeah, he's
I
never
can't.
going to answer the question, even if we ask it.
Right. So we'll never know. Just given the benefit of the doubt to him on this instance, where realistically he didn't have to resign. He could have just taken that meeting with the NHL and seen what happened there, because logically speaking, if the AGM is safe, he probably would have been safe from the NHL specifically. Whether or not he would have been safe from the Panthers is another question. So who knows? But Quenneville resigned of his own volition. Cheveldayoff took the meeting instead. He hasn't been completely absolved of all guilt by the National Hockey League, but he.
Well, he's met with the NHL already,
Well,
right?
yeah.
He met with them first.
They didn't come out and say like, oh, he had nothing to do with this. They just said like, look,
Well, no,
based
they
on
said,
what we heard and found, there was enough people of levels higher than him.
who dropped the ball, essentially.
Right. And then as far as the Tays comments are concerned, I mean, look, to me, his apology really read as one of those open mouth, insert foot kind of moments where he realized, like, oh, you know, I shouldn't have said that. And now, again, whether or not he realized I shouldn't have said that because it was wrong, or I shouldn't have said that because people are mad, are two very different scenarios, right? In one of them, Taze would have had that moment of reckoning and been like, oh, like, I screwed up. This is not okay. Let me fix this. Or Taze is like, well, people are mad, so I need to squash this now, right? I kind of read it the same way as you did. I thought it was just kind of him kind of trying to bury the hatchet and just bury it under the rug and just say, let's just move on. It didn't really feel all that sincere. And I do want to note something positive that has come out of all of this, which is awareness, right? I don't know if you read the article. I meant to send it to the group. I forgot that Patrice Bergeron sat all of the Boston Bruins down in a room and they watched the entire Kyle Beach interview. And he said, look, this is not ever going to happen while I'm here. You know, this can't happen while I'm here. This can't happen when I'm not here. This can't happen when I'm retired or when I'm dead and buried. You know, basically, one of the stand-up guys in the NHL, Patrice Bergeron, sat everyone down and said, this is something we need to tackle. And I think that's really fantastic, honestly. So, like, hats off to Patrice Bergeron for doing that. He didn't have to, you know? Like,
Right.
he could have just been like, oh, yeah, it happens, you know, or it happened and we need to move on. Like, no, he was like, listen, we're going to talk about this. So I think more NHL players, not necessarily even just captains, but just players should kind of take his example, and less NHL players should take Taze's example. Kind of odd that I'm out here, like, pumping the tires on a Boston Bruin as opposed to Chicago Blackhawk, considering how much I don't like the Bruins. But hey, you know, Bergeron did the right thing, and Taze really, really didn't.
He's really doing all the wrong things.
So
He's trying his hardest, you know?
Look, it's one of these moments where Taze has to realize this moment is bigger than him. You know, like, this has nothing to do with you, okay? Nobody's pointing the finger at you, Jonathan, being like, well, you know, you were on the team at the time, right? This is a moment where you need to realize my allegiances to these people is not what's important here. It's not even necessarily all that important about what I care, you know. The important thing is the awareness that this is creating. So for me to make these comments and then detract from that is really the issue that I have, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the NHL at this point has more or less kind of concluded their investigation. I know USA Hockey, actually, they're reaching out to all the families of any of the kids who ever attended Aldrich's camp, because they want to just kind of make sure that they're properly handling anything that could have come up during his time with Team USA. So, you know, I applaud them in that effort too, because rather than take the, well, we're just going to wait until somebody comes to us approach, they're saying, like, all right, let's go out, let's try to get these lists of kids that were at this camp, contact their parents, contact them, talk to them, etc., etc. So it's good to see that this is being taken seriously by a lot of people. And you know, again, I say hopefully it's something that we never have to talk about ever again, and not because I don't want to talk about it, but because it's something that should never happen. I'm sure that, unfortunately, an incident like this will occur again at some point, but hopefully, instead of talking about how badly the organization screwed up, we can talk about how an organization handled it effectively and properly and efficiently. Only time will tell, I guess. Before we move on from that, do you have any kind of final thoughts on that situation?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up.
All right, so just wanted to kind of wrap that up and get everything out there. And we will be talking about some NHL news today. So the Jack Eichel saga is finally over. It should have been over before the season started, but it's over, okay? Jack Eichel was traded to the Vegas Golden Knights along with a conditional 2023 third-round pick. And to the Buffalo Sabres goes Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, who is 20 years old, a 2022 first-round pick, and a 2023 second-round pick. Now, there's conditions on both those picks, and the important condition is if the 2022 pick is in the top 10, then every other pick goes back a year. So it would become a 2023 first and a 2024 second. So, yeah, obviously Vegas has gone on record in saying they support Jack Eichel surgery. So currently the timetable for that is after the surgery is done. One of the doctors that they interviewed said he should be back skating by 6 weeks, contact by 8 weeks, which means he should, if all things go well and nothing relapses or anything, get back on the ice with between a month or two left in the season before the playoffs. So give me your thoughts, because this is obviously huge.
Well, I'm surprised it ended up being Vegas, because I thought Vegas was one of those teams that was pretty, not to say like poor on talent, but just like in terms of like the things that Buffalo was supposedly looking for in terms of like the return. So I was just kind of surprised by who it ended up actually being that won out on the Jack Eichel sweepstakes. And I mean, the return's kind of underwhelming. It's not great. I mean, it's good for like what they got, I guess. It's good for like what they were able to do, but I don't know. I think Peyton Krebs is a good hockey player. He's going to be a good hockey player anyway if he keeps developing. But I don't think Alex Tuck is really all that great. I don't think he's really going to help the Sabres all that much right now, which I guess really doesn't matter, right, because they're rebuilding. I guess the important thing is that they got the first-round pick out of it, which, if all goes as predicted, will probably be a mid to, late first-round pick.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised. I'm not surprised that Vegas is in on it from a perspective of they don't really have the best centers in the NHL, all things considered. I mean, their top center is William Karlsson, who's not bad for sure, but I would say that he probably most comfortably slots into that second line spot. They've never really had a true elite first line center, I would say. And this gives them something that, I mean, look, when he's healthy, Jack Eichel is one of the best players in the NHL. I don't think it's really all that controversial to say that. Especially considering instead of now being on a line with a $9 million Jeff Skinner, he's most likely going to slot into that first line, and he'll probably be playing with Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty when everyone's healthy, which that's scary. That's kind of terrifying. And now if Nolan Patrick gets healthy again, you can bump him down to the second line, or you can stick him on a wing with Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, William Karlsson, like any of these guys. Dadnoff is still there. So the thing that is interesting to me, there's two things. Is one, we heard that the Calgary Flames were in on it, and I do want to talk about the Calgary Flames being in on it, but the second thing that's interesting is right now, according to Cap Friendly, the Buffalo Sabres have about $16 million, or the Vegas Golden Knights have about $16 million in cap, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's because Pacioretty, Stone, and Eichel are all in LTIR, and the three of them combined is roughly $26.5 million. So there's gonna, if these guys are healthy but before the regular season ends, unless they're just gonna pull a Tampa Bay and just keep them on LTIR until the playoffs start, somebody's got to go. There's got to be room made in the cap for this team somewhere, some way, some shape or form, because you can't. And then specifically looking forward to next season, what if all these guys are healthy at the start of the season?
Yeah, well, that's the biggest problem. Is going forward, how do you get under the cap if you're Vegas? Because you have to pay Jack Eichel and Alex Pietrangelo like $9.5 million each, in addition to all the other big contracts. Mark Stone's also making a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, Eichel's making 10, Stone's 9.5, Pacioretty's 7, Pietrangelo's 8.8. I mentioned, kind of a glut of forwards up front almost. Let's say for argument's sake, the first line is Eichel, Stone, Pacioretty. The second line could be Patrick if he's healthy, who's only making 1.2. So that's definitely helpful. You could run Nolan Patrick, William Karlsson, or you could even run Nolan Patrick, Marchessault, and Riley Smith, and trade William Karlsson's $5.9 million. But you're still gonna have to shed salary somewhere else. So, I mean, they could always just not re-sign Riley Smith, who's a UFA. Still paying Dadonov $5 million. I don't know. Do you trade Alec Martinez because he's 34 and he's making $5.25 million a year?
I mean, as much as you don't want to, you might have to. It's tough. There really is. I mean, they got rid of Fleury, so like there really isn't a lot of other cap in other places that's just dead cap to them.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention they also have a lot of guys who are coming up on restricted free agency specifically. I find it hard to believe that Riley Smith will be on this team past this season, just because you don't need him in that top six anymore. So, I don't
I
know.
feel bad for Riley Smith, Everywhere he goes, he's like a productive, good player, and he just always ends up being the odd man out. Florida, Boston, Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, since going to Vegas, he has 60 points in 67 games, 53 and 74, 54 and 71. Last year, kind of a down year, 25 and 53, but still 14 goals isn't bad. He's got 4 points in 9 games currently. I don't know. I mean, luckily it's not my job to figure out, but I have to imagine, A, that Riley Smith won't be on this team beyond this season, and that, B, another one of these forwards is going to get moved out because you have basically 1, 2, 3, 4 other players who should be in the top six. William Karlsson, Marchessault, Dadonov, and Patrick. So I imagine that one of those guys will also get moved out. If you move out Marchessault and William Karlsson, you can save about $11 million. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. But yeah, so the Calgary Flames, right? We heard that they were in heavy on this Jack Eichel thing, and the rumor was that part of the package return was going to be Matthew Tkachuk. Now, those are just rumors. Sure that they were tweeted out by some of the verified accounts that we can usually trust, but still, at the end of the day, even those guys get it wrong sometimes. Let's say, for argument's sake, that Matthew Tkachuk was involved, right? So let's say it was Matthew Tkachuk, a first and a third, or something like that.
Right.
Do you think that the Sabres should have taken that deal instead of this one?
Well, it would have been better for the now. No, because I think they'd still realistically be in a situation in a couple of years. Like the way I was seeing it, right? Like Matthew Tkachuk is like 23. He's already on his big contract. Like he's off his ELC.
Well, he's an RFA at the end of this year, so we'll see how much money this guy gets. Yeah, he's making $7 million a year, and
that was it. He signed that $7 million bridge. That's right.
Which I guess, to your point, is another reason not to trade for him, right? Because you could just sit out and wait for somebody to offer sheet him.
Pretty much. And the real thing is, it's not like Buffalo doesn't have the money, right? So it's not like, oh no, they're gonna be able to pay him. It's like, bro, they just managed to get up to the cap floor.
Yeah.
So the real issue, I think, is that you're gonna have a disgruntled superstar in like 2 or 3 years who's like, why the hell am I still here? Because Buffalo, realistically, in my eyes, isn't gonna be ready to compete until I think they'll be okay maybe 3 years from now, but I don't think they're gonna start being good until maybe 4 or 5 years. Because, I mean, they have to start over. They don't have anything anymore. They just lost Jack Eichel, who's supposed to be the centerpiece of this rebuild, and now what do you have left? Jeff Skinner.
And Dahlin.
I mean, they have Rasmus Dahlin, who's good. Don't get me wrong, he's kind of been underwhelming so far, but again, he's been playing on one of the worst teams in the NHL since he got drafted, so I'm taking his performance up to this point with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
So, all that being said, it's I feel like Peyton Krebs is a little easier just because Peyton Krebs is on his ELC. He's 20. By the time he's 23 and the team's kind of okay, he'll start to be hitting his stride as opposed to Matthew Tkachuk, who's mid-stride. This guy's in his prime. So I think there's just some more off-ice considerations and not necessarily financial ones, just more of do we want to do this again kind of considerations. So I think that's really like what I factored into why I think like the Peyton Krebs deal ends up being better in the long term. Because like honestly, Alex Tuck becomes disgruntled. Like who gives like if I'm the GM, who the fuck cares, bro? Like he can walk. Like it's okay if he leaves. Like he's not a cornerstone of the rebuild that you're planning. He's already what like 26 years old, isn't he?
25, yeah.
So like you're not to sound mean, but you're not building around a 25-year-old perennial 15 to 20 goal scorer. Like that's not a cornerstone because you already kind of got that in Jeff Skinner. Like
Yeah, if you get lucky and you get 10 goals.
right. So and that's kind of how I feel about Alex Tuck. I feel like Alex Tuck, you're lucky if he maybe gets 15 to 20 because he's been playing on a good team for all these years. Like he's had good line mates. Like Vegas has been a notoriously like deep team since they've come into the league. Like they've had 3 good lines, you know. So like he's been maybe a little insulated, and I feel like now that he's going to probably be like one of the go-to options in Buffalo, it's going to be kind of a rough transition for him, which honestly isn't his own fault, but it is what it is.
Yeah,
I
I
also
mean,
think like
oh, sorry, good.
I also just think like it's smart to get somebody like Krebs in return, just because like as good as Matthew Tkachuk is, he ultimately is a winger, and like scoring like bigger scoring wingers are kind of becoming more like they're easier to find. There seems to be a lot more of them in the draft. You know, we seem to be seeing a lot more of this kind of like the players in the draft get bigger. We're seeing a lot more like Austin Matthews type players who are like 6'2" or 6'3" with like disgusting hands, as opposed to like the Patrick Kanes who are like small. You know, so like I think getting a guy like Peyton Krebs who also brings a lot of size in his own right, but who's a natural at center iceman, brings a lot of value because centermen aren't easy to find. Like you don't just go over to a tree and pluck a number 1 center iceman, you know? So if you have a kid who's got first round pedigree, who's got, you know, the potential to be a top 6, if not a number 1 center iceman, like even if he's a 1B, like that's still better than you got or than you have. So I mean, that's not just like shit all over Buffalo, right? Like Buffalo does have some pieces that I think are going to be good. Like they have Jack Quinn, they just got Peyton Krebs, they have
JJ Paterka.
JJ Paterka. They have a centerman. Why can't I? Well, Casey Middlestat, if he ever gets, you know, lives up to his potential, which we might never know because Buffalo might have just ruined his whole career. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because the, there is that factor of like you know, you have to consider something in a sense of like, well, I can either take like what are the percentage chances that Peyton Krebs is going to turn into as good of a player as Matthew Tkachuk, right? That's one way you can look at it and say, well, I'd rather take the guy that I know is already good versus the guy that might become good. But on the other hand, the issue then becomes, well, what are you going to do with Matthew Tkachuk, right? Because he's just going to be this same kind of situation as Jack Eichel playing on a team that's terrible when he's clearly like heads and shoulders above the rest of his teammates, and then he's just going to become annoyed because he, especially, you know, it's not like the Jack Eichel situation where Jack Eichel was on the Sabres and he's always been on a bad team, whereas Matthew Tkachuk came from the Calgary team that was good and looks like they're taking those steps, and he's been in the playoffs before, to a team that has no chance. So, you know, I think the real issue, you know, we're not really going to know specifically how this trade has turned out until we see what Peyton Krebs becomes and what that first-round pick turns into, because if that first-round pick turns into nothing and Krebs becomes a middle six forward, then obviously, yeah, like Buffalo just got, like, fleeced, you know, like robbed blind. But, you know, they're in a decent spot this year. They have 3 first-round picks. You know, the draft this year looks like it's going to be maybe not as deep as last year's, but still not bad. So they got 3 first-round picks, you know, 3 second-round picks next year. Sure, the picks that they got out of Vegas and Florida probably won't be anything super high, probably in that middle between 15 to 24-ish area, maybe even lower. Like, I think the Panthers going to go really far in the playoffs, so their pick's probably going to be even lower. Who knows about the Vegas Golden Knights, but it's just, I think this was a trade that was good for everybody involved in a lot of ways. Like, Buffalo gets to move on, right? They can finally wash their hands of it. Looking at their team, they only have, outside of their young guys who are on ELCs and stuff, past next year, they only have a couple of players on their books, right? Jeff Skinner, which I can't imagine that this contract is not bought out at some point. Like, especially when this team is ready to start competing and they need that money, I can't imagine that this contract runs its course until 2027. Just being honest.
Absolutely not.
Rasmus Dahlin is on the books until 2025. That's not a problem, obviously. And then Alex Tuch is on the books until 2026. Assuming he stays here, I doubt it. I think Alex Tuch will be traded by next trade deadline next year, honestly. A 26-year-old winger who can dish you 15 goals for the playoffs, sure. A lot of teams would take that, right? So they're in a position to succeed, okay? Can they do it is the question, because all these bad contracts are coming off the books. The Okposo contract is going to be coming off the books. They'll be able to negotiate with Victor Olofsson, see how much money he's going to get. Zemgus Girgenssen's 2.2 is going to be coming off the books. They can probably honestly negotiate him down to like 1.5, right? All these other, the $3.8 million for Colin Miller, he's probably going to walk in free agency, I would imagine. They don't have any really horrendous contracts outside of Jeff Skinner, but it's going to be important for them to kind of be like, okay, it's kind of like what the Vancouver Canucks said, like, all these bad contracts are coming up. We're just going to hold off. We're going to wait until they're done, and we're going to see where we go from there, right? And then for Eichel, he gets to play on a contending team. How long will the Vegas Golden Knights be contending? That remains to be seen, because a lot of their pieces are starting to age. But at least I would say for the next 3 years, they're still in that Stanley Cup contender window, and then the 2 years after that, they'll probably be in that bubble area as people start to age out. It's certainly a lot better than Buffalo. Obviously, that goes without saying. And for Vegas, they finally get that elite first-line center that they really have never had,
That they've been trying to get since they pretty much became a team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this trade just works out for everyone. We'll see how the Golden Knights navigate the cap, because that's going to be a big thing. But look, you are never going to get, when you have a guy that's as good as Jack Eichel is, there's no such thing as getting fair value, because he's just worth so much more than teams are willing to give up, Like, realistically, Jack Eichel's probably worth, the price of a first-line winger and like 2 first-round picks, realistically speaking, because he's just that good. But no team is really going to part with that,
I don't think any team that's trying to get Jack Eichel is in a position to part with a player like that is really the issue.
Yeah, and it's like we always say. It's like, imagine if it's like when the Oilers traded Gretzky. Like, they did not get fair value for Wayne Gretzky. You know what I'm saying? You just don't. Like,
there's just no such thing.
But I think all in all things considered, this was a pretty good trade for everyone, and I'm praying and I'm hoping, please, for the love of God, let the Buffalo Sabres do it right this time around, because God knows they did not do it right the last time. And it's funny because we're talking about, okay, well, they can finally hit the reset button, as if they were ever in a position that wasn't rebuilding since he got there. Like...
True. I mean, Buffalo is one of those teams that I feel like they're kind of like the New Jersey Devils to me, and that they're like in a perpetual rebuild. Like, it just feels like it never ends. Kind of like the New York Islanders for a while there, like during the John Tavares era, where it was just like, how are we still at like step 2 of like 18? Like, what is going on? And like Buffalo keeps getting to step 2 or 3, and then they have to go back to the drawing board. It's like, I honestly really feel bad for Sabres fans.
Oh, I feel horrible for Sabres fans.
Like,
Like,
especially with a team that has such like an illustrious history, you know, like you have the French Connection, you have Dominic Hasek, you have like, you know, a real winning, like
the Ryan
proud
Miller era,
lineage.
you
Yeah,
know.
like you have a proud lineage if you're a Sabres fan, and like you should be very proud to be a Buffalo Sabres fan because I mean, I don't feel bad saying this. They've been the most successful sports team in Buffalo in the last 20 years. Like they've been better than the Bills have been in like I don't know how fucking long. So the fact that like they're such a disgrace now is kind of I don't know. I'd be ashamed if I was like the GM of the Buffalo Sabres and I was having to do this all over again or the owners. It's like I guess it's the Pagulas, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that,
Do they really care?
well, what turned around, ultimately, what turned around the New York Islanders was,
The
yes,
change in ownership.
yeah, exactly. It was like, yes, Lou Lamoriello came, and yes, Barry Trotz came. But why were they here in the first place? Well, because the ownership had passed from Charles Wang onto the current ownership group. Now, ignoring the whole Brett Yormark situation with Barclays, thank God he's not involved with the team anymore. Um, but Scott Malkin and John Ledecky ultimately are the reason that these great names have come to New York, because Garth Snow and Charles Wang weren't going to pay the money that a guy like Lou Lamoriello or Barry Trotz deserves. But Scott Malkin and John Ledecky said, all right, I'm signing a check. Here's the team. Let's run with it. And it's been a fantastic success since they've gotten here. We've been in the playoffs every year since Barry Trotz and Lamoriello have arrived. Back-to-back Eastern Conference championships. I mean, it's been nothing but a complete turnaround. Instead of being that team where it's like, we don't know where we're going to play next year. Do we have a home? Where'd our captain go? It's okay. We have a stadium. We have state-of-the-art UBS Arena, brand new stadium. New captain, a competitive hockey team. I think the only reason, I think the biggest reason, honestly, the thing that's holding Buffalo Sabres back is the fact that it seems like the ownership group just hamstrings the GM, and not to mention the fact that the Sabres GMs aren't on the level that they should be. I mean, I think people underestimate just how important it is to have a GM that knows what the hell they're doing. And you can't just like hire the next guy in line every time you fire the last GM. You can't be like, oh, I fired my GM. I'm gonna, promote his AGM. It's like, no, because he's the same guy. It's the
Well, that's really
same
the
guy.
problem. It's like you're just perpetuating the same like theory. Like it's like the world's worst game of telephone, right? Where like the first guy starts with a plan and it's probably pretty coherent, and then you can him and just keep hiring the next guy in line, and he's kind of just like trying to do what the other guy was doing, but like he doesn't have all the pieces anymore. And like by now you're at the point where it's like 9 people deep, and you're like the message is totally changed. It's like they really need to just clean house. Like it needs to just start over in Buffalo. And whether it's like needs to be a change in ownership, like you said, but like that front office has to go. Like I say, I don't know if they should can the coach so much as like he's kind of just like there. Like it is what it is, you know.
Yeah.
This is only his first season. But the other thing with the Islanders, though, I think it's important to note is that like Charles Wang, while being the problem, was kind of the problem for like he cared too much. Like
Yeah.
he was too
100%.
involved in team enterprises. And it's not that he wasn't willing to like open his checkbook, because I mean he signed the Alexei Yashin contract. It's more like Garth Snow wasn't willing to invest the money in the right places. You know what I mean? Like you'd
Yeah.
let guys go that you really were like, why? Like Travis Hamonic going, like at the time he went. I mean, I understand like there was a personal side to that, but it was more like there up until that point there was like strenuous contract negotiations between him and the Islanders, I remember, and it was just like, why are you fighting with this guy? He's clearly one of the best number 3 defensemen in the league at the time. Like, so it is what it is. It's just like it's just so funny to see that like how bad ownership in like either regard can lead to a team being like just, for lack of a term, fucked. Like
Yeah.
Ottawa for a long time had the same problem where it was like you had Eugene Melnick like sticking his fingers in every like thing that was happening with the team, and it was like, bro, you're not, as much as you're a quote unquote hockey guy, it's like you hired me to be the hockey guy. Like let me do my job. But then, in Buffalo, and they had a problem for a long time with that, they drove Erik Karlsson out of town. But In Buffalo, it's just so funny to me that like an ownership group that goes, yeah, no, you can do whatever you want. Like we'll just keep signing checks. Like it's fine. And they still can't get it right. It's like you've been given like free reign to execute your plan. Like, do they just keep hiring guys that have no like forethought, no planning to any of this? Like, who signed the Jeff Skinner contract? Like, I know I was advocating for them to sign Jeff Skinner, but I at no point was I saying you should sign this guy for $9 million or whatever, like 8 years, whatever the ridiculous term they gave him on it was. Like, I really think like the Jeff Skinner thing would have been fine if you would just signed him for like $5 million for like 2 or 3 years, and we wouldn't really still be harping on this, you know? Like, it wouldn't be like this flag, like this big red flag on like a rudderless ship, you know, and be like, oh wow, yeah, there's the problem right there.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
it's like that lack of foresight, you know.
yeah, I mean, again, not to like. Obviously, I'm not dumping all over Charles Wang. Like, the guy gave his heart and soul to this team, and like, he's
I mean,
one of the biggest reasons that we stayed on Long Island when we did.
that's exactly it. Like outside of like what he like how much as much as he like set the hockey side of the Islanders back by being too involved, his involvement also led to a lot of really great things on and like the community out here and like the Islanders organization in general. Uh, I mean that guy tried so hard to get that arena built for you
Oh yeah,
guys. He fought like he offered to finance it and they still said no. Like he offered to foot the bill for like $100 million stadium and they were like no.
yeah.
Like
Like
if that doesn't show you he cared, you know. I'm not trying to like argue. I'm just saying like
well, no,
it's
no,
just
no.
funny.
It's important to note because like, obviously he leaves behind like a mixed legacy of on ice production, but like he did and is the biggest reason why the Islanders stayed on the island for as long as we have to this point because with a less involved owner and somebody who just didn't care as long as he was getting paid, the team might have honestly been moved by now. So,
And
um,
for what it's worth, too, I mean, he kind of helped the Islanders like image rebound somewhat from like that because he took over right after that fiasco where that guy owned the team for like 2 weeks. You remember?
yeah, yeah,
Like, which kind of was a big like stain. Again, like the Islanders are another franchise that has this long winning tradition. Like you have a storied franchise, and it was just kind of sad to see that happen. And then like I'm glad to see that like they're on the upswing. So it's like hopefully the Buffalo Sabres can figure it out because like bro, it's just such a shame that like they have a whole arena and you go in there and you look at all the names up there, you know, it's like the French Connection. Scotty Bowman even coached there for a couple seasons and they were good with him. Like even Lindy Ruff's good years, like all the names and all the history and it's like the ownership just keeps spitting like right in the face of everybody who walks through the door of that stadium.
I mean, not for
Like,
nothing. I think it's not like we haven't had good general manager free agents. I mean,
oh yeah,
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. There was a little guy by the name of John Davidson who, you know,
who's still out
is
there?
he's working for the Jackets now. He's like he works in their organization. Um, for as much as towards the end of his tenure with the Rangers, things might have gotten away from him a little bit. He's, you know, part of the reason why the Rangers are as good of a trajectory as they are right now. He was a big part of that rebuild. So
I mean, we don't land Artemi Panarin without the prior relationship between him and John Davidson. I
right,
mean, that's really
so
what it came down to.
like it's not like there's just been there's no established GMs out there that we can hire. It's like no, there's plenty of established GMs. And again, I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for young GMs to come into the organization, but this is not the time for the Sabres. Generally speaking, a rebuilding team is actually not that bad of an idea to hand to a young GM because he can get the reins, understand what's going on, and, learn the game.
But like they've tried that so many times, you know, to your point already. Like they've
Yeah.
done that like 3 or 4 times.
When this is your fourth rebuild in 20 years and you've been to the playoffs, like, since the calendar has flipped to 2010, I think, like, once or twice, you know? Like,
I think it's funny. Like I have like a contrary belief to that. Like I think like the time to test out like a new GM is when the team's already like kind of built and like established. Kind of like with Breezeball taking over Tampa Bay. There were so many like he only had to deal with very like small things and some little tinkering to get the team to like win, you know. Whereas I feel like a rebuild. I mean, to your point, it can be great for a new GM to come in and like try to really get his hands on it, but I think like I personally believe like a rebuild is a good time for like an experienced GM who knows what he's doing, who like knows what it takes to build a hockey team, especially when you're Buffalo and you've been in the situation where it seems like you're kind of just nebulously like assigning players and drafting players with no like real direction or cohesion. I mean, do you have any idea what they were trying to build in Buffalo with Jack Eichel? Because like I couldn't tell you
You
based on like, how
know,
they drafted, how they signed.
the only thing I can really think was that because when Jack Eichel came to the team, um, Mikhail Grigorenko and Zemgus Girgensons were still supposed to be better than they turned out to be. So, there was that build up the middle belief, and then they obviously drafted Risto and Dahlin. But ultimately, the real issue is that the ancillary moves that they made outside of that core group just never made any sense. Like signing this guy and that guy, signing Jeff Skinner to this $9 million contract because you're so desperate to have a winger to play with Jack Eichel, which it's not like there weren't wingers available during the 5 years that Jack Eichel was there. It's not like
I mean, Nito Niederreiter came up. You could have gotten Nito Niederreiter for the exact same like position. Like he could have rode shotgun with Jack Eichel and scored 35 goals. Like, come on. He almost did it playing in Carolina with players who probably aren't as good as Jack Eichel.
yeah, I mean the only guy in Carolina that's on Jack Eichel's level is probably Sebastian Aho, but
And
and
maybe
that's
Svechnikov when he finally gets there, but
it's no
that's
yeah
to me to
no
be seen.
disrespect to Svechnikov. I just think he's a little more one dimensional, but I mean again
Yeah, no, you're right.
he's still a great player. Obviously, I'm not taking anything away from Svechnikov.
No, yeah, you're right.
I don't know. I hope with basically in 2 years' time they'll have a completely clean slate with most of the bad contracts coming off. God help them to try to move that Jack Skinner contract or Jeff Skinner. That's going to be the only albatross on this team, but they'll have a mostly clean plate. They'll have 2 years worth of draft picks at that point under their belt, and I hope they do it right, and they need to get a new GM. And that's, look, Kevin Adams, maybe he was he dealt a bad hand because he walked into this whole situation with Jack Eichel being as shitty as it was already when he took over in the first place. Before this whole obviously injury thing happened, but I mean he just made it 10 times worse. But I feel like that man will never work a GM job in the NHL after he gets canned out of Buffalo. That's for sure.
Oh no. So I guess I have a real question for you now. If you're the Buffalo Sabres, like, what GM are you kind of looking for? Like, what are you going to look for in your next candidate? Because there are some pieces here that you're going to look to build around. So, like, are you looking for a younger guy who's more like I guess you're probably looking for a more developmental coach, right? Like a more developmental GM, like somebody who's more invested in that side of the game.
I mean, I already name dropped him. I think John Davidson would be a fantastic general manager for the Buffalo Sabres because...
See, the thing is, he's never been in a general manager's capacity, though. He's always been, like, the president, which essentially is just, like, the GM on steroids, I guess, right? Like, he's the one that signs all the checks and, like, okays all the moves by the GM, so I guess it really is, like, the
only
same thing.
Because of how involved he was, because sometimes there are presidents that, like you said, they just sign checks, but I know that he was very involved with the Rangers rebuild.
Oh, yeah.
So just because like his hand was so heavy in that rebuild, and check the standings and check the depth that the Rangers have, it's gone pretty goddamn well. Obviously, look, let's not sit here and pretend that like they didn't kind of somewhat get lucky with the Artemi Panarin situation, given that he was available at the time that he was. It was just like the perfect time for him to come to New York. But all that to be said, even if you take the Artemi Panarin out of the situation, you still have guys like Lafreniere, Capo Caco, Keandre Miller, Adam Fox. Take your pick, right? So I think I would name drop John Davidson, but if you're asking for more of like a generic sort of situation, I would think what you need now is a no-nonsense kind of GM. Like, think about like a GM like Lou Lamoriello, right? Who comes in, he's like, this is the way it's going to be done. These are the rules, and here's why. And I think the reason you need that is because you've had so many GMs in the past who, like you said, are kind of just in this nebulous headspace of like, whoa, let's sign this guy and hope it works, or let's try this out, right? You need a guy with a plan who's gonna sit down, walk into that meeting, slam his like document down on the table, and be like, "This is what's happening. Here's why, and here's how we're gonna get it done." You know, like a
Right.
clear and direct vision, instead of like, "We're rebuilding. In what direction? Let's go and see what happens." Like, no, 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 no. Like,
See what happens as the years go by. It's like no, 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 no.
you need a guy like Lamoriello or a guy like Iserman who's just going to be like, this is the deal. You know, I think the time in Buffalo for testing out new GMs is over. You need an established name, a veteran who's been there, done that, who's going to figure it out. You know,
How mad would you be if they hired John Chaika?
if they hire John Chaika, then I genuinely think that the
They
NHL
deserve
should
everything they get.
No, no, not even that. I think if they hire John Chaika, the NHL should actually step in and hostile take over the Buffalo Sabres because, like,
That's
that,
like actively destructive.
yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, we'll see because I'm sure that there are some GMs that are kind of going to be coming up. I mean, I'm kind of surprised they didn't kind of try to jump all over Steve Yzerman when he was available. Um,
I
kind of,
think Steve Yzerman wanted to go home though. I think like
yeah, yeah.
I don't think any team other than Detroit was gonna land that guy.
You know, again, John Davidson's available.
I mean, hell, even the actual GM from the Rangers, Jeff Gorton's available, and he has a previous relationship with the team.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and like he didn't do a bad job with the Rangers. Like again, like you said, for like how mixed up and how weird that ending that of his time in New York was. Like same thing with John Davidson, whether the job was just too big for him or like the stage, I guess, was too big for him and it got away from him, whatever. But like the long and short of it is like they did a good job. Like they drafted well, they signed well, and we don't have any really bad contracts that they signed. You know, the most questionable contract the Rangers have signed in the last so many years, they signed it this year, and it was with Chris Drury at the helm, and it was that Barclay Goodrow contract.
Yeah.
And that's just because of how long it is, you know? Like, Jeff Gorton wasn't, like, sitting around, like, just being like, I'm going to sign Alex Pietrangelo to an unnecessarily long and absurd contract for no reason. You know?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a time and a place for, and this also extends to the coach, by the way. Because look, it's not like the Sabres haven't had established coach. I mean, their current coach Don Granato has a record. You know, like he's coached in the NHL before, somewhat, but
I mean, we see how that goes. I mean, Ralph Kruger had an NHL coaching record, too, and
I think when it comes to a team that's in a spot like this, you know, you kind of have to pull an Islanders. You kind of just have to go out and get the elite of the elite because, you know,
that's the only way you're going to turn it around.
would the New York Islanders be as good as they are without Barry Trotz? Absolutely not. I mean, realistically speaking, when you look at this roster, it's one of the more talent-poor rosters in the NHL. I mean, outside of like Matt Barzal, Anthony Beauvillier, and Oliver Wahlstrom, I would say the rest of the team, talent-wise, isn't really all that impressive. And that's not to take anything away from guys like Ryan Pulock, Anders Lee, Brock Nelson. I love these guys, but they're not talented players. What they are is effective. You know, like Anders Lee is one of the best people, in my opinion, the best net front presence in the NHL. Ryan Pulock and Adam Pelech are the two of the top two shutdown players in the NHL. But it's not necessarily because they're like out and out talented. They're just like hardworking, effective hockey players. So without a coach like Barry Trotz, I really don't think we're that good. Like,
I mean, I would agree with you. I don't think so either.
so to a team like Buffalo Sabres, that should really be like kind of an example of like, okay, well, you know, kind of like that old saying, you get what you pay for, you know?
Yeah.
Well, when the Islanders went out and paid Barry Trotz and made him one of the richest coaches in the NHL, we got what we paid for, you know? And when you go and cheap out and you try to pay a guy like we previously had when we tried to pay, what's his face, Doug Waite, we paid him on the low, well, we got what we paid for, you know? Like,
True. Very true.
it's a mess, but I hope Buffalo rebounds from this. I really sincerely do. So my energy is going out to you Buffalo Sabres fans. I know where you're at. Believe me, growing up an Islanders fan, I get it. I understand. I know where you're at. If your organization can turn it around, it will get better. That's just a big if. A really big if when it comes to this team.
Oh, yeah.
What are we at? All right, we'll touch on the Blackhawks just really quickly. We're already at 50 minutes, but obviously,
their first win of the season.
If there is one singular team who is worse than the Chicago Blackhawks, and it is the Arizona Coyotes, and they're bad by design. Okay, they are intentionally bad. They knew they were going to be bad.
I mean, yeah, they were trying to get that number 1 overall pick, and can you blame them? I mean, they're hitting the reset button pretty hard.
Like, Chicago this past offseason, by all metrics and by all accounts, this team should be significantly better than they were last year. I mean, if you look at their centers cores alone, last year you go from Pius Suter, and I don't remember who was playing second-line center, to back to Jonathan Toews and Kirby Dach, okay? That right there should tell you we're going to be a better team. Patrick Kane is healthy. And then you go out and sign a little guy by the name of Seth Jones. Hello, one of the best defensemen in the NHL. You turn Duncan Keith into Seth Jones, who, no offense to Duncan Keith, but Seth Jones just happens to be in his physical prime at this moment in time. So, obviously, instead of Kevin Lankinen and Malcolm Subban, you get a guy by the name of Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean, every indication was that this team is going to be good this year. Maybe not playoffs by some metrics. I don't think I put them in the playoffs, but this team was going to be good. So I guess my big question, what the hell is going on? Can you make any sense of it?
I don't know, bro. They just haven't been defending well. Like, it looks like everything's gone wrong for the Chicago Blackhawks. And then they lost, I don't know how many players to COVID protocols at one point. I mean, they lost Patrick Kane for a while. But it's just been I don't know, man. I couldn't tell you what's gone wrong in Chicago other than, like, everything. Like, they're not scoring a lot, which wasn't a problem the last couple of seasons. They've been scoring a lot, but they also get scored on a lot still, which Seth Jones was supposed to help, and he really hasn't. They haven't really done much. Defensively, Marc-Andre Fleury, I mean, it's not that he's looked bad, but, like, you can tell, like, the age is starting to catch up with him. He's not as, quick as he used to be. And he's not going to be able to cover up all those holes that, like, a porous defensive team is going to leave him.
Yeah.
If this was, like, 27-year-old Marc-Andre Fleury, it'd be a different story.
For the record, they're 27th in goal scoring, which
is strange. Yeah, I mean, you have DeBrincat, Kane, Doc, Taves, Nylander. Like, how are you not scoring goals?
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously they're the far and away, or not far and away, they're the worst team in the NHL in terms of goals against. They're tied with the Arizona Coyotes for goals against with 42 goals against on the season so far. They're a net negative 17. Nothing's been going right. The only thing that's been going right is that Patrick Kane is Patrick Kane, and he has 11 points in 7 games. But
guy's a beast.
I mean, it looks like this team just doesn't know how to play hockey. And it's weird because, like I said, by all metrics, when you look at the players they lost versus the players they gained, this team should be way better. I mean, they even went out and got Jake, not just Seth Jones, but they got Jake McCabe, who's a reliable top 4 defenseman, and Marc-Andre Fleury in net, and just Do you think he regrets not retiring and playing for the Blackhawks?
I think every day he sits up and has to remember he used to go to the Blackhawks. He's like, oh God, can I still retire? Is it too late now?
I mean, I think he technically still can if he really wanted to.
Do you think he's just you think he should have just done a Tuukka Rask and just nebulously retired but not retired, just kind of stayed wherever he is doing nothing?
Maybe. I mean, do you think that this is also kind of like the indication to the Blackhawks as an organization that maybe it's just a retool time? Maybe instead of trying to push so hard for the playoffs again, maybe we should just let it ride out and see what happens? Or do you, if you're the GM of the Blackhawks right now, are you letting it ride, or are you going out there and trying to fix, I guess, just trying to get upgrades at various positions because the team on paper is actually not all that bad?
I mean, I'd probably just ride it out, honestly. Like, I think, like, it'd be a bad idea already to try. You've already tried to alter the trajectory of your team because, like, you've already sped up your rebuilding process by going out and getting Seth Jones and adding him to that core. So, I mean, I really just think it's like, they might need to change coaching because, I mean, Jeremy Colleton isn't exactly the best coach in the league. Like, he's not blowing anybody away. But it's also unfair because he inherited a aging team. But, I mean, every year he's been head coach, they've had a hard time defending. Like, it's almost as if there's a correlation, you know?
I want to ask you a question.
Like saying, ooh,
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, it's just like saying, like, looking at Sheldon Keefe and being like, yo, why is Toronto so defensively poor, like, deficient? It's like, oh, yeah, well, look at their coach. But anyway, yeah, what were you going to say?
The other day, during one of their games, he called a timeout, and he handed the players a blackboard and said nothing during the timeout and let them figure it out. What do you think about that?
I think that's what happens when you have a coach who's only slightly older than the players he's coaching. I mean, he was on this team. Like, Jeremy Colleton played for the Blackhawks, like, in 2011. So, like, he knows these guys. It's bizarre. See, when things are going good, I can see a coach doing that, right? When you're, like, on a winning streak and you're just calling the timeout to give them some time to, like, breathe or whatever, and you're just like, yo, guys, here's the whiteboard. You guys figure it out. You know what I mean? Or you send one of the assistants over with the whiteboard and they all talk it out together. But, like, when you're losing and you're losing bad, like, you're getting blown out, like, 5-1, 6-2 on some nights, like, the head coach is at some point got to, like, put his foot down and be like, no. This is what I want. This is what you guys need to be doing. Because clearly they're not listening. And it almost seems like he's got no control over the team itself. Like, if he's handing off the whiteboard to the guys on the ice and just saying, you guys figure it out, then what are you paying the head coach for? Like, that's your job. Your job is to figure out how to get them to win on the ice and how to react to these situations. And if you're just going to pass it off to the guys who are on the team that the team's already paying, then why do we need you, you know? Why don't we just get a coach who's actually going to coach a team?
Yeah, I think contextually there is a time and a place where you can just let the players do what they need to do. Because, look, it's not like these players are sitting there going, I don't understand how hockey works. Like, obviously they understand the core of the game, right? But if John Cooper in Tampa Bay does this, nobody bats an eye. Because the team is good, they're in a good position, and a lot of people are probably just saying, well, maybe he's just letting the players do what they got to do because his team is so high caliber. Like he has such elite players at every position. Maybe he's just going to let them ride it out,
Well, that's like, I mean, there's an old saying about Scotty Bowman. Like, Scotty Bowman said he knew when to coach. Like, there's a time and a place to, like, push on the gas pedal and, like, lay on your team and really get involved. And there's a time to, like, just lay back and just let them play. Because, like you said, it's not like these guys don't know what they're doing. Like, it's not like they don't realize the mistakes they're making. Like, they're not going out there being like, wow, why are we getting scored on every time? So, I don't know. It's just contextually, it's a bad look.
Well, yeah, because the counter to that is when a team is playing so poorly, they clearly need direction at that point in time. When the team's high flying and they're doing everything right, they maybe, that's the time to just let them do what they got to do because they're doing everything right at that point. But when they're doing everything wrong, that's when you as a coach need to step in and be like, okay, listen, here's what's going to happen. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix this, as opposed to just being like, well, to me, what that shows me is that he's out of ideas. He just does not know what to do. And if that's the case, then it's
Time to
probably
find a
time
new
for a
coach.
new coach. Like,
Like, I don't know how you could run out of ideas with this Blackhawks team. Like, it's so good. Like, I don't understand how you can't get them to win. Like, sure, their defense isn't as good as other teams, but the fact that they're not scoring at all, it's like, what, did you try to focus on defense, have the whole team play defensive, and you're still getting shelled every night? Like, I don't see how a team that could score so many goals the last so many years all of a sudden dry up. And I think it's part of it's like, streakiness. Like, they're going to start scoring goals eventually. But, like, do you really want to wait? Because you're already 1-9-0 or whatever the hell it is. Like, you're already in a hole. And the stats are, if you're out of the playoffs, a playoff spot by come October, not October, come November, like the end of November, the odds of you getting in decrease significantly from there on. It only gets harder, you know? So do you want to wait until like maybe they figure it out under Jeremy Colleton, or would you rather get rid of it now and try to like get your finger on like the problem and figure out what's wrong and get somebody in there who can fix it? Well, you still kind of have a shot at being competitive. I mean, I think it's kind of like it's gonna be hard after like an 0-9 start or whatever it was. Like,
yeah, they're sitting at 1-8-2. So
yeah, like that's gonna be a hole you're gonna be digging out of until probably January. But you'd have to do a lot of winning to do it, and I really don't think Colleton's gonna help them do a lot of winning.
definitely an interesting situation. Do you have any final thoughts on anything before we wrap up this episode?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think of like nothing else big really happened in the league. Oh, actually, PK Subban gets fined the league maximum for the second time in a week for slew footing.
Yeah, yeah.
Third time he's been fined in the last month and a half for the same
Which,
action.
by the way, can we stop trying to injure Trevor Zegras? Like,
Kid's disgusting. Like, why is everyone trying to hurt him? I don't get it.
like Subban trips him, and then in the next game, I forget who it was. Somebody, I forget who the Ducks are
They
playing,
hit him from
takes
behind.
a 5-minute major in a game misconduct for checking
He
from
got
behind.
suspended
Like,
for that. Yeah, whoever it was, I remember getting suspended for that hit on Trevor Zegras.
but can we stop trying to hurt this guy? Like, anyway,
But I guess more to the point is like, at what point do we suspend him? Like, I really think strike three should have been it, right? Like, if you've already been fined twice and they even offered him a hearing, like he was there, like they talked to him. So I don't understand. I thought hearings only resulted in suspensions. I didn't think you could get a fine from a hearing.
I don't know how the mechanics of that works, but what I will say is a lot of people are just gonna say, "Oh, it's just a trip," but the slew foot is actually incredibly dangerous because you're falling backwards, and nine
Yeah,
times out of 10, concussions happen from hits to the back of the head. Like, the human body has evolved to a point where the front of the head is really hard because, like, ooga booga, look at rock, hit rock on head. You know, like if somebody, like back in the caveman era when the guy was throwing a rock at your face, you know,
yeah, that's why your forehead's the hardest part of your body, bro.
yeah, your skull was like, all right, we can't be like soft out here, right? But like the back of the head is usually when the brain hits the back of the head is when a lot of the concussions happen. So it's actually incredibly dangerous what he's doing. And slew footing in general is just, first of all, it's a bitch move, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
second of all, it's incredibly dangerous. So I'm kind of surprised after he did it the first time and they fined him that they didn't slap him with maybe like a 1 or 2 game suspension as a warning shot. You know, you kind of like, hey, listen, PK, like let's pump the brakes on this, buddy, because like you're gonna hurt somebody. You know.
for what it's worth, like this also goes back to last season. Like there's that clip of him and Trent Frederick or from last year where they're arguing over it, and then the clip ends with him slew footing Trent Frederick. Like I don't understand how the league can just like see all this evidence. Like it's like all piling up, and like they can just be like, he's not trying to hurt anybody. It's like I don't know how you could be slew footing somebody and not try to hurt them. Like nobody's gonna see that coming. Nobody's expecting you to kick their skates. Like that's so dangerous. And where he's doing it to people is even more dangerous because it's usually on the boards where your legs have like nowhere to go. So now you're like you have to worry about your legs toe picking and all sorts of other awful things while you're falling backwards. You know? I mean, he
It's
did it to Ryan Reeves in the preseason, and Ryan Reeves went out for the whole preseason with like a fucked up knee. Like
it's certainly not the thing that you want. It's not the thing you want to be doing at all, period. But it's certainly also not the kind of thing you want to be getting involved in when you're trying to get your career back on track. So,
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I think slew footing is like right up there with the most dangerous things you can do in hockey. With as like right up there with like butt ending and spearing. Like those three things to me are always like the three no-nos of all time at hockey. Like you just don't do any of these things, you know? So I don't know why you'd be like, you know what? I really want to get back at this guy instead of just like doing something dumb and like running him and like or like trucking him, you know? Why would you be like, yeah, I'm gonna just kick his legs out? That seems like a justifiable, you know, decision. Like I just don't get it. Like it's almost indefensible, you know? So I don't know how it only resulted in a fine.
you could also just fight. Like, the mechanic of fighting is in the game for this very specific reason.
Right. Like, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you really had a problem with a guy, you just run him and blow him up, and then essentially a fight would probably start. Like, if you run a guy. So, like, just do the thing that's in the sport to handle these things. Like,
Yeah.
we've developed a system for this. There's literally an unwritten rule book that everybody knows about how to get back at people. Slew footing is not in that rule book.
Yeah, no, definitely not. We'll keep an eye on that for sure, because if it continues to happen, I can't imagine he's going to get away with this for the entire season without a fine at some point, or
Do you think he should have
a
been
suspension.
suspended? Do you think, like, the 3 strikes he should have been gone after this one?
I mean, I think after the first trip, because the timeline is so compressed,
Small,
you know,
yeah.
I think after the first one should have been a 1 or 2 game suspension. Like I said, as a warning shot, just be like, hey,
Right.
let's take about 20% offer there, you know, like let's relax a little bit, because you're gonna hurt somebody, you know. So I certainly think a suspension, 1 or 2 games, just as a little like, hey, tone it down kind of situation.
Right.
I think that would have been warranted. I wouldn't have had too much of a complaint about it, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, I think that's gonna just about wrap it up for this week. Next week, who the hell knows? As always, we're always just keeping our eye on the NHL news, figuring out what's going on. Maybe we'll talk about the Penguins maybe next week, because Crosby's still out. You know,
Oh, they're having a real rough go.
Mike Sullivan is still out.
For the head coach. Oh, no.
You know,
They can't catch a break, man.
who knows? Well, we'll take a look at the NHL. We'll see what's going on. We'll figure it out. So I want to thank all of you guys for watching, and we will see you guys again next time.